I chose to talk about the battlefield and National Military Park where the Battle of Kings Mountain was fought. I partially chose this battlefield because I am doing my final project on the Battle of Kings Mountain, but I actually am also from Kings Mountain, North Carolina. So this is a very special historical event for me, and I've been to the battleground many times and just learned a lot about it growing up. So it's very exciting for me to get to kind of talk about it here. Obviously, this battlefield is extremely important in terms of American Revolutionary history and just interpreting history from that time period, because this battle represented a huge turning point in the war. Obviously, as you all know, Cornwallis had been conducting an offensive in the southern states, specifically in North Carolina. And after a defeat of General Gates and the American army at the Battle of Camden in August of 1780, the southern states, as Isaac Shelby put it, were almost entirely abandoned to the enemy. So Patrick Ferguson was dispatched to the South Carolina backcountry to kind of scope it out, and they were planning to continue that offensive of Cornwallis. Local patriots and militiamen caught wind of this from a Whig scout and got together and discussed what they would do to try to stop this attack and actually confront Ferguson and his men. This led to the fight at the Battle of Kings Mountain. Ferguson and his men were essentially on the mountain, continually pushed up the mountain and up the ridge, were attacked from four sides from the Patriots, which were led by people such as Isaac Shelby, William Campbell, John Sevier, Benjamin Cleveland, and Joseph McDowell. And eventually they pushed further and further Ferguson and his men up the ridge until Ferguson decided to take his men down the ridge, and they were met with a strand of bullets. And obviously, as we know, that's where Ferguson lost his life. And so just briefly, the battle in that moment represented just kind of the end of Ferguson, but also just the reminder that the British had been outflanked, they had been outsmarted, and that the Patriots were still in the war and still ready to fight for freedom. And so after this battle, Cornwallis shifted his focus from North Carolina to just Americans in the South, which changed the trajectory of the war completely. So to go into more just about the battlefield, it has been very well kept since the Revolution, which has been quite a while, obviously, but at the battlefield, there's a visitor center, a museum, an outdoor arena, some camping locations, and also a large walking track that actually winds itself through the battlefield and leads all the way up to the ridge where Ferguson and his men were stranded. Along the way on that walking path, there are markers to notate various things about the battle. There are markers that represent areas where the Patriot forces were stationed, specific to who may have been leading that specific group of Patriots. It shows actual locations to where Ferguson and his men were, where actual parts of the battle took place, and gives more information as to what actually took place at the Battle of Kings Mountain. Then once you get all the way up to the ridge, there is a monument there that is honoring the people who fought in the battle. So things that have been done since the Revolution to commemorate this battle and continue to keep the American Revolutionary history alive. Actually, in 1880, at the centennial celebration of the battle, there was a monument erected that was paid for by locals from York, South Carolina, and Kings Mountain. It was put up and made to honor those who had fought and as a celebration of the victory of the American Army. However, in 1906, there was an actual United States permanent monument that was erected by the government that was put as a national historical marker. And a couple years later, in 1909, once that project was completed, it was officially recognized as a national historical location, and as in the battlefield, not just that monument, but has been there ever since. And that's something that you can see if you go there now. Another thing that was interesting that I found on the website and remembered from being a kid and going to the battlefield was there's also a large pile of rocks that's supposedly supposed to be on top of the grave of Patrick Ferguson and represent his final resting place. And it's something that brings people to see. It's like a small attraction. There's not really been, I think, historical accuracy if that is where he actually is buried and where he actually landed, I guess, in his last breath, but it is something that they have there to kind of represent this is where he was killed. The field itself has been tremendously preserved and is in great shape. It's great to go there because you get an idea of the terrain of the ridge, exactly what it might have looked like for the Patriots to be there, and the four sides that they would have been coming from to actually get to Ferguson and his men. It's also in really close proximity to Cowpens, which is another significant battle in the American Revolution. So that lends itself to another positive and important factor for this specific battlefield. I think for teaching purposes and education, field trips to this location would be great just for learning about Revolutionary history, especially in the southern states, and learning about the southern campaigns and how the Revolution tied into their statehood and their state history. It has a map of the battle. It has, they frequently do reenactments that would give a visual aid to the history that they'd be learning. And it's outside. It's got lots of space to spread out and walk and get exercise and things like that. So I think it would be a perfect spot to learn, but also have some leisure, because I know that history is not always the most favorite subject for every student. There are, I think, two important interpretations for this battlefield that I think would be significant to mention. Number one would be obviously that this battle was a huge turning point in the war. As we know, Thomas Jefferson stated that it was a huge turning point. It was a turning point of the war. And as well as in one of the articles I read, Henry Clinton was actually quoted as saying that the Battle of Kings Mountain was the first link in a long chain of events that would eventually lead to the loss of America entirely for the British. So I think it would be important to focus on the fact that this battle changed the course of the Revolution and look at ways that happened, what took place to change that, making it a very significant battle. I think the second important interpretation of this location would just be its proximity to multiple states and how that shaped who fought, why they fought, and what this battle meant for the Southern campaign of the war. Because in the battle, you had Patriots from North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Virginia. And so I think because of the proximity of it being on the North Carolina, South Carolina border, it would be interesting to bring up what the Revolution and the fight for freedom meant in the Southern colonies and how this battle played into that, why they were influenced to fight, and if their location and citizenship, so to speak, in the areas that they lived played a part in their desire to meet Ferguson and to try to win this battle in the war.